You may not realize it yet, but something within you has already begun to stir far beneath the threshold of your conscious mind. It moves like a quiet tremor in the depths of the psyche, a subtle rearrangement of the inner architecture that signals the arrival of a new evolutionary phase of your own being. When I look at you, I do not merely see a person attempting to understand themselves or to interpret their sensitivity. I see an empath standing at the threshold of a profound psychic awakening, a movement that does not occur on the level of personality alone, but in the subterranean caverns of the soul, where archetypes breathe, where the self whispers, and where destiny reshapes itself from within. You might imagine that evolution is something that happens slowly, externally, through the pressures of the outer world, but psychological evolution, the kind that touches the empath, does not depend on the calendar of the physical world. It happens in moments when the unconscious stirs, when the shadow shifts, when an inner doorway quietly unlocks and invites you into a greater phase of your own psychic life. Many of you have arrived here today because you can feel something changing and yet cannot name it. You feel the subtle thinning of the veil. You sense that old emotional patterns no longer hold the same power over you. You feel yourself withdrawing from noise, and you do not know why. You wake up in the morning with a strange sense of distance from the person you once were. It is not depression, nor confusion. It is metamorphosis. When the empath reaches this threshold, they are not merely healing or recovering. They are awakening into a new mode of existence that their previous self could not yet contain. This awakening often begins with an uncomfortable disorientation. The empath suddenly becomes aware that their inner sensitivity is no longer something passive, fragile, or easily overwhelmed. Instead, it begins to feel like an organ of perception, a psychic compass pointing toward truth others cannot yet see. You start to notice the micro movements of your own emotions. You begin to sense the intentions of others, not from suspicion, but from an intuitive clarity that feels almost ancient. You begin to feel, perhaps for the first time, that your energy is not merely something that leaks into the world, it is something that shapes the world. That is when you know evolution is underway, when what once felt like an affliction begins revealing itself as a form of inner authority. Yet there is always a moment before this awakening in which the empath believes they are breaking down. The psyche, before it expands, often contracts, it isolates, it pulls you inward as if the unconscious were gesturing for your attention. Come back into yourself, for something is trying to be born. This is why many empaths experience a period of silence, withdrawal, or sudden disinterest in old relationships and roles. They are not losing themselves, they are shedding a layer of identity that no longer corresponds with the deeper truth emerging within them. Imagine a dream in which you find yourself standing at the entrance of a vast forest, a place that is both familiar and unsettling. You do not know what lies inside, but you feel irresistibly drawn to step forward. The trees seem to lean inward, forming an archway as if welcoming you. In Jungian terms, this is the threshold of individuation. For the empath, this dream reflects the moment the psyche summons you into a deeper encounter with the self. The forest represents the unknown content of the unconscious, the memories you have suppressed, the emotions you have carried for others, the gifts you have not yet chosen to claim. To enter the forest is to accept that the next chapter of your evolution will not be written through avoidance or external validation, but through profound inner contact with your own depths. You must understand that an empath's awakening is always tied to the relationship between consciousness and unconsciousness. Throughout your life, your sensitivity allowed you to perceive emotional tones, relational undercurrents, and the subtle truths people hide even from themselves. But while you were busy feeling the world, you were also unconsciously absorbing parts of it. You carried pain that was not yours. You carried conflicts that were never resolved. You carried the shadows of others as if they belonged to you. This burden created an inner imbalance. The self could not fully express itself because the empathic nature, beautiful as it is, had turned inward into a form of self-abandonment. But now something in you refuses to continue this pattern. Something ancient within you is waking up an archetypal force that says, your life must belong to you again. When an empath begins to awaken into a new evolutionary phase, the first sign is often the reclamation of psychic boundaries. Not boundaries built from resentment or anger, boundaries built from awareness. Boundaries built from a profound understanding that your sensitivity cannot serve its higher purpose if it is drenched in the emotional debris of others. The soul begins reclaiming itself, and in that reclamation, your empathy becomes sharper, clearer, and paradoxically stronger, not because you are exposed to more, but because you are no longer drowning in what is not yours. In this new phase, the empath also begins to see their shadow more clearly. People often misunderstand the shadow as something purely negative, but the shadow is simply the part of you that has not yet been brought into conscious awareness. For the empath, the shadow frequently contains your anger, your unmet needs, your desire for autonomy, your disappointment in others, and the truth of your inner strength. For years, the empath buries these elements because they want to be kind, forgiving, understanding, but true empathy does not arise from self-erasure. It arises from wholeness. And as you awaken, you begin to see that your shadow is not your enemy, but your teacher. It is the guardian of your power. It holds the very qualities that will complete your evolution. This is why a dream may appear to you during this time, a dream of confronting a figure with two faces, one gentle and one fierce. You may feel frightened when you meet the fierce face, believing it represents someone dangerous, perhaps an intruder or a threat. But when you look more closely, you realize that both faces belong to you. The dream is an invitation. Integrate the strengths you have denied in yourself. Your empathy cannot fully evolve until you accept that you, too, possess the capacity for self-protection. assertiveness, and inner fire. The empath who awakens into their new evolutionary phase is no longer someone who simply absorbs or heals. They become someone who shapes, who influences, who transforms. At this stage, the energy within you begins to reorient itself. You notice that your intuition becomes more precise, almost surgical in its clarity. You sense deception instantly. You feel when someone's words are not aligned with their emotional truth. You perceive the hidden wounds driving someone's behavior long before they speak of them. But unlike before, when such insights overwhelmed you, you now observe them with a kind of calm detachment. You are no longer pulled into emotional entanglements. This detachment is not cold, it is conscious. It is the sign that your psyche is reorganizing itself into a stronger, more coherent structure. Another phenomenon emerges. Your solitude becomes sacred rather than lonely. In your earlier life, solitude might have felt like exile. You may have feared it because silence made you confront emotions you were not ready to face. But in this new evolutionary phase, solitude becomes a temple of renewal. It is in solitude that your unconscious begins communicating with you more directly. You may find yourself waking with vivid dreams, symbolic messages, powerful intuitions that illuminate patterns you once overlooked. You begin to understand that what you once called intuition is not a mere emotional reaction. It is the language of the self. There is also a subtle but unmistakable shift in how you relate to the world. You no longer feel compelled to prove your goodness or justify your depth. You no longer force your empathy into spaces that do not honor it. You recognize that your energy is a resource, not a debt. And as this recognition deepens, the world around you responds differently. Some people who once relied on your emotional labor may feel threatened. They may accuse you of changing. They may say you have become distant, cold, or not yourself. But in truth, you are becoming more yourself than you have ever been. When an empath awakens, those who were nourished by your self-sacrifice will inevitably resist your evolution. Yet the self within you is far stronger than their discomfort. If you pay attention, you will also notice that synchronicities begin to multiply in your daily life. These are not coincidences, they are messages. They indicate alignment between your conscious path and the deeper movement of the unconscious. Synchronicity is the psyche's way of guiding you without using language. The more awakened you become, the more you see that these signs are not random. They are part of a dialogue between you and the greater intelligence of your own soul. You may feel an inner heat during this time, not physical, but energetic. It is the fire of transformation, the alchemical process that turns the empath's vulnerability into power. Many ancient traditions speak of this fire as a serpent, a dragon, or a phoenix, symbols of psychic renewal. In Jungian psychology, this fire is the activation of the self, which seeks to burn through the illusions, wounds, and false identities you once carried. The empath who awakens does not become less sensitive, they become more conscious, and that consciousness is what transforms sensitivity into power. Your life may begin to feel strangely different, as if it is reorganizing itself around a new axis. Certain relationships feel outdated, certain ambitions feel hollow, certain environments feel draining in a way you can no longer ignore. Do not resist these impressions. They are the psyche's guidance system. Evolution requires shedding, and shedding requires courage. The empath who is awakening must trust their own inner signals more than the outer pressures of society. That trust is the new foundation upon which your next phase will be built. In this stage, you may also begin to feel a kind of inner authority rising, gentle but unshakable. You are no longer easily manipulated or guilted. You no longer carry emotional weights that belong to others. You begin speaking with clarity. Even if your voice once trembled, you begin taking space. Even if you once shrank yourself, you begin standing in truth. Even when truth disrupts familiar dynamics. This is the emergence of the mature empath, the one who knows that compassion does not require self-sacrifice, and that inner power does not contradict sensitivity. This inner authority is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the recognition that your soul was never meant to remain small in order to soothe the insecurity of others. When the empath enters this new evolutionary phase, they feel the profound urge to reclaim their own narrative, to stop defining themselves by their wounds, to stop living as a reaction to the emotional storms of others, to stand in the center of their own psyche, grounded, awake, and deeply connected to the self. And yet, this awakening is only the beginning. As you continue to awaken into this new evolutionary phase, there emerges a fascinating tension within you, a tension between who you once were and who you are becoming. The old self, shaped by years of emotional attunement to the world, still whispers its familiar fears, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of stepping outside the identity that kept you safe for so long. But beneath those whispers is something far more ancient and unyielding. It is the voice of the self, speaking not in fear but in inevitability. It knows that the empath cannot remain suspended forever between awakening and hesitation. In the architecture of your psyche, evolution has already begun, and now your consciousness must catch up to what your soul already knows. During this stage, you may feel that reality itself becomes strangely fluid. The world appears the same, yet something in the texture of your experience has altered. Colors feel deeper, silence feels alive. Conversations reveal layers you never noticed before. You recognize intentions behind words before the words are spoken. This is not imagination. It is the sharpening of inner perception. The empath's intuition, once diffused in many directions, now begins to focus itself like a beam of light. You start to see not only the emotions of others, but the psychological patterns shaping those emotions. You begin to understand the wounds behind someone's anger, the fear behind their avoidance, the longing behind their cruelty. This is a profound evolutionary shift. The empath is no longer simply receptive, they are becoming perceptive, not merely feeling, but knowing. Yet, this clarity does not arise without cost. As your perception sharpens, illusions fall away, people you once idealized suddenly appear transparent in their motives. Relationships that once felt essential now feel hollow or one-sided. You may feel grief as the psychological fog dissolves, revealing truths you avoided for years. But this grief is a necessary purification. In shedding illusion, you reclaim energy that was trapped in outdated narratives. You begin to see that much of your past suffering came not from your sensitivity, but from your refusal to honor what your intuition had been telling you all along. I once spoke of the night sea journey, the archetypal descent into the unconscious that precedes psychological transformation. The empath entering their new phase often faces this descent not as darkness designed to destroy, but as darkness designed to reveal. In dreams, this may appear as descending into a cave, diving underwater, or entering a labyrinth. The descent symbolizes the journey into the depths of the psyche where unintegrated emotional material resides. The empath who resists this descent remains trapped in old emotional cycles, but the one who accepts it discovers a hidden truth. The unconscious is not a place of danger. It is a reservoir of wisdom waiting to be reclaimed. The descent also reveals an inner contradiction that empaths often overlook: the belief that their sensitivity is incompatible with power. This belief is a psychological distortion born from childhood wounds, moments when your emotional depth was dismissed, mocked, or misunderstood. You learned to associate sensitivity with vulnerability, and vulnerability with danger. But as you awaken, the psyche corrects this distortion. In your dreams, you may encounter an animal that looks terrifying, a wolf, a serpent, a panther. But as you approach it, it does not attack. Instead, it watches you with a knowing gaze, as if guarding something meant for you. These animals represent the instinctive, assertive, even fierce parts of yourself that you suppressed in order to remain acceptable to others. When you face them without fear, their power becomes yours. This is the rediscovery of instinct, the restoration of the inner animal that helps you survive, not by shrinking, but by standing in your natural authority. As this instinctive energy returns, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel the boundary between self and other with greater clarity. Earlier in your life, this boundary was porous. The emotions of others flowed into you without resistance, shaping your moods, decisions, and even your identity. But in this new phase, the boundary becomes conscious. You feel when someone's energy crosses into your psychological space, and you feel your own energy retract or expand in response. This is not coldness, it is sovereignty. It is the empath reclaiming their psychic skin. In this stage, people may react to you differently. Some will feel drawn to you with magnetic intensity, sensing your depth and clarity. Others will feel threatened, even if you say nothing. Your silence becomes a mirror in which they confront their own shadows. The empath's presence, once soft and absorptive, now becomes reflective and catalytic. This is why some individuals who thrived on your old patterns, your compliance, your emotional labor, your quiet endurance may attempt to pull you back into the person you once were. They are not reacting to you, they are reacting to the collapse of the psychological arrangement that benefited them. But when the empath awakens, these dynamics lose their power. You may find that synchronicities intensify even further. Numbers appearing repeatedly, random encounters that feel meaningful, dreams that correspond to waking life events, sudden insights that arrive with the clarity of revelation. These synchronicities mark the alignment of conscious and unconscious forces within you. The psyche is no longer divided. It is attempting to move as a unified whole. This unity is the foundation of the new evolutionary phase. One of the most misunderstood aspects of empathic awakening is the emergence of sacred anger. Many empaths fear anger because they equate it with harm. But anger, when purified of resentment and inflated ego, becomes a guiding force. It tells you where your boundaries were violated. It tells you what you cannot tolerate anymore. It tells you where your soul demands truth. This anger does not explode. It illuminates. It is the fire in the dream that does not burn the forest but reveals the path through it. Sacred anger is not aggression. It is alignment with the self's demand for authenticity. When an empath begins to feel this anger without shame, they are stepping into a fuller, more integrated version of themselves. As this integration deepens, your relationship with fear transforms. Fear no longer paralyzes you, it informs you. It becomes a signal rather than a cage. The empath who evolves does not eliminate fear, they develop a mature relationship with it. You may dream of standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a vast ocean below. In earlier phases of your life, you may have stepped back, overwhelmed by the height or the unknown. But now, in this dream, you step forward. You trust the fall. You trust the water. You trust yourself. This is the symbolic leap into a higher dimension of psychological life. Fear becomes not an obstacle, but a threshold. Your inner world also becomes richer. You may feel drawn toward activities or symbols you previously overlooked, certain colors, certain animals, certain landscapes, certain books. This is the psyche communicating with you through symbolic resonance. When an empath awakens, they begin to feel guided not by external expectations but by inner meaning. You may find yourself fascinated by alchemy, mythology, or ancient spiritual traditions, not as escapism, but because these traditions speak in the same symbolic language as the unconscious. They reflect the archetypes moving within you. One archetype in particular begins to stir during this phase, the self as the inner guide. In earlier years, you may have looked outward for direction, seeking approval, advice, reassurance, but the more you awaken, the more you realize that the true compass lies within. In dreams, this inner guide might appear as a wise old figure, a luminous animal, a mysterious voice, or even a version of yourself that looks older, calmer, and more resolute. This figure does not flatter you, it confronts you. It reveals truths you avoided. It pushes you toward your own potential. The appearance of this guide is a powerful sign that the empath is entering a new era of psychic maturity. Another profound shift occurs in how you understand suffering. In your earlier life, you may have seen suffering as something to avoid, solve, or carry for others. But as you evolve, you begin to see suffering through a different lens. It becomes a form of initiation, a message, a crucible in which the ego is burned away to reveal deeper layers of the soul. This is not romanticizing pain, it is recognizing its transformative role. When you look back at your past wounds, you no longer see only loss or betrayal. You see the scaffolding of your awakening. You see how each wound taught you something about boundaries, intuition, strength, or purpose. This reframe is not intellectual, it is alchemical. It changes the psychic charge of your memories. What once weakened you now strengthens you. At this stage, you may feel an urge to simplify your life, to remove the noise, to clear the path. The empath who awakens begins to reduce the number of people they give emotional energy to. They choose depth over frequency. They become selective not from superiority but from necessity. The new phase of your evolution requires spaciousness. It requires silence. It requires time to integrate the psychological metamorphosis happening within you. This simplification is not withdrawal, it is refinement. You also begin to feel a new relationship with authenticity. You value truth more than harmony. You value clarity more than comfort. You value alignment more than approval. The empath who evolves no longer hides their depth in order to make others feel secure. You begin speaking truths you once silenced. You begin expressing needs you once suppressed. You begin stepping into environments that nourish your growth rather than diminish it. Authenticity becomes not a choice, but a necessity for psychological survival. Perhaps the most striking change is this: you no longer fear your own power. Power, for the empath, has long been associated with dominance, aggression, or harm models learned from wounded people whose power was distorted. But as you awaken, you realize that true power is not about control. It is about presence. It is about alignment with the self. It is about the courage to live your truth even when others resist it. Power becomes the natural expression of inner coherence. And slowly, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The world responds differently to you because you respond differently to yourself. Reality itself reconfigures around your evolution. Opportunities appear where before there were only obstacles. People who resonate with your new frequency enter your life effortlessly. Synchronicities guide you with increasing precision. You begin to feel as though life is not merely happening to you, you are participating in its unfolding with conscious intention. What is emerging within you is not a new personality, but a new psychic center, a deeper gravity, a more coherent field of consciousness. The empath, once shaped by external currents, begins to shape their own inner and outer worlds. But this transformation is still unfolding. The next stage awaits. As you move deeper into this evolutionary phase, something subtle and yet profoundly transformative begins to occur in the inner landscape of your psyche. The relationship between your conscious mind and your unconscious no longer feels adversarial. For much of your life, these two forces existed in tension. The conscious mind, shaped by societal expectations, family conditioning, and the survival demands of your early years, sought control, clarity, predictability. But the unconscious, vast, fluid, symbolic, held the truths your ego was not yet prepared to face. It carried your instincts, your repressed emotions, your forgotten memories, your disowned power. Now something new is happening. A bridge is forming between these two realms. The empath who once felt torn between intuition and logic begins to experience a sense of psychological unity. This unity is the essence of individuation. You may feel this unity emerging in moments that seem insignificant. A sudden knowing without explanation, a decision made effortlessly, a conversation where your words feel guided by something deeper than personal intention. These are not accidents. They are evidence that your psyche is organizing itself around a new center, a center that no longer prioritizes pleasing others, avoiding conflict, or maintaining emotional harmony at the expense of truth. Instead, this center prioritizes authenticity, integrity, and inner alignment. The empath who awakens begins to speak from a place that feels older than their personality, wiser than their wounds. A curious phenomenon often arises at this stage, a recurring dream or image of a doorway, a threshold, a bridge, or a crossing. These symbols reveal that the psyche is attempting to integrate something long separated. Perhaps you dream of stepping into a river that flows between two worlds. Perhaps you stand before a door that glows faintly, waiting for the courage to open it. Perhaps you feel yourself walking across a bridge suspended between mountains, knowing that the person who reaches the other side will not be the same one who started the journey. These dreams are not random. They are messages that your unconscious is actively reorganizing itself. They signal that the empath is entering a phase where intuition and consciousness become partners rather than adversaries. As this integration deepens, your emotional sensitivity begins to evolve into emotional intelligence. Instead of simply absorbing the emotions of others, you start recognizing the mechanism behind them. You begin understanding that what you feel is not always yours. You can sense when a wave of emotion entering your body originates from someone standing beside you, or from a collective atmosphere, or from your own unresolved memory. This differentiation is essential, for without it, the empath remains lost in a sea of emotional impressions, unable to discern the voice of their own soul. But now, clarity emerges. You begin to distinguish between empathy and enmeshment, between intuition and projection, between compassion and self-betrayal. With this clarity comes another transformation. Your relationship with truth becomes sacred. Not truth as in facts, arguments, or opinions, but psychological truth, the essence beneath the surface. You find yourself unable to tolerate emotional dishonesty, manipulation, or inconsistency. Where once you might have excused such behavior, rationalized it, or absorbed it, you now feel a natural repulsion. Your psyche rejects what is not aligned with your evolution. Just as the body rejects what is toxic, you begin to see that your sensitivity was never the problem. It was the absence of boundaries and discernment that distorted it. Now, truth becomes your compass. This shift can feel both empowering and isolating. On one hand, you stand more firmly in yourself than ever before. On the other, you may feel as though you are drifting away from familiar relationships, roles, and environments. This is a natural part of awakening. The empath, stepping into a new evolutionary phase, inevitably outgrows certain psychological contracts. Relationships built on your silence will dissolve when you begin to speak. Connections built on your self-abandonment will fracture when you reclaim yourself. Dynamics that depended on your emotional labor will collapse when you stop performing it. In this dissolution, there is grief, but also freedom. The psyche must create space for what aligns with your new level of consciousness. There is an archetype that becomes particularly active in this stage, the wounded healer. You have carried this archetype within you for years, often unconsciously. It is the part of you that learned compassion by surviving wounds, that became intuitive by navigating emotional chaos, that developed insight through suffering. But the wounded healer, when unconscious, remains trapped in cycles of rescuing others while neglecting oneself. When awakened, however, this archetype undergoes transformation. It becomes the conscious healer, the one who understands that healing is not performed through self-sacrifice, but through presence, boundaries, and wisdom. You begin to sense that your gift is not in carrying others, but in helping them carry themselves. At this stage, your inner world becomes extraordinarily symbolic. You may experience visions during meditation or flashes of imagery just as you are falling asleep. A phoenix rising from ashes, a serpent shedding its skin, a lotus blooming in muddy water, a torch burning in the darkness. These symbols do not need interpretation. They are confirmations of your metamorphosis. They represent psychic processes happening beneath awareness, rebirth, renewal, shedding, emergence, illumination. The empath who sees these images is witnessing their own transformation through the language of the unconscious. You may notice that your energy shifts dramatically. You once felt drained by the emotional turbulence of others. Now you feel anchored, grounded, even when in the presence of intense emotions. You once felt overwhelmed by the suffering of the world. Now you feel guided in how to respond, discerning what is your responsibility and what is not. You once felt compelled to fix everything you felt. Now you understand that not all suffering is meant to be removed, some is meant to be transformed by the one who carries it. This is emotional maturity. It is the emergence of an empath who is no longer reactive but conscious. As the awakening deepens, your relationship with time may shift. Moments feel slower, heavier, more saturated with meaning. You find yourself noticing details you once overlooked, the inflection in someone's voice, the texture of silence, the vibration beneath a conversation. This heightened awareness is not hypervigilance, it is presence. It is the empath finally inhabiting their own body, their own mind, their own reality. The present moment becomes a portal through which the unconscious communicates more freely. And then there is solitude, the great companion of the awakened empath. In earlier phases, solitude may have felt like loneliness, exile, or emotional abandonment, but now it becomes nourishment. You seek it willingly. You protect it fiercely. You feel the psyche expanding in silence, like a flower blooming at night. In solitude, you are not empty. You are full of insight, full of feeling, full of unconscious material rising to meet the light of awareness. Solitude becomes the sanctuary in which you integrate your evolution. This integration is not linear. At times you may feel powerful, clear, and elevated. At other times you may feel tender, vulnerable, or uncertain. These fluctuations are normal. Psychological awakening is cyclical, like the moon phases. Each cycle deepens your consciousness, strengthens your boundaries, and reveals new layers of the self. The empath who awakens is not becoming invulnerable, they are becoming whole. Wholeness includes strength and softness, clarity and mystery, fire and water. A dream may appear during this phase that captures this wholeness. You are walking through a dimly lit hall filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflects a different version of your childhood self. Wounded self, hopeful self, angry self, wise self, forgotten self. At the end of the hall stands a door made of light. You approach it, feeling both fear and awe. As you step through the door, the mirrors vanish, and you find yourself standing in a vast open space, illuminated by an unseen source. This dream symbolizes integration. You are no longer fragmented by old identities. The door represents the passage into a larger psychic container, your expanded self. This integration also affects how you speak. Your words become more deliberate, more anchored, more resonant. You no longer speak to be understood. You speak to express truth. You no longer shrink your insights to avoid intimidating others. Instead, you honor the knowledge flowing through you. People may tell you that your words feel healing, piercing, or revelatory. This is because your speech is no longer coming only from the ego, it is coming from the unconscious, filtered through the clarity of an awakened empath. Another element emerges in this phase that may surprise you: the calling. This calling is not a career path, a job, or a goal. It is a psychological mandate from the self. You may feel drawn to creative expression, to helping others, to spiritual work, to teaching, to writing, to healing, to leadership. But the calling is not defined by what you do, it is defined by who you are becoming. It is the pull toward your purpose, the gravitational force of the self, drawing you into alignment with your destiny. The empath who awakens cannot remain in environments that suppress their calling. The tension becomes unbearable. Eventually, you must follow the path that your soul has been whispering for years. This calling often brings with it an unexpected form of courage, not courage in the dramatic sense, but quiet courage, the courage to say no, to walk away, to begin again, to trust yourself, to choose truth over comfort. This courage is the signature of the awakened empath. The ego may still tremble, but the soul does not. During this time, life may orchestrate what appears to be coincidences. You meet people who deliver messages you needed to hear. Books fall into your hands at the perfect moment. Opportunities arise in ways that defy logic. These synchronicities are the psyche's way of saying, keep going. You are aligned. You are evolving. You are stepping into the phase that was waiting for you since childhood.